In the annals of war, few machines have been dismissed so swiftly, so completely, as the Japanese Type 95 Ha-Go. To the Allies who faced it, it was the tin can tank, a flimsy contraption of bolted plates and exposed rivets, more akin to a child's plaything than a weapon of empire. Its armor, a mere whisper of steel no thicker than a man's thumb in places, invited laughter from the start. Stories rippled through Marine barracks and Sherman crews like campfire tales. A 50 cal will punch right through it, like butter on a hot knife. They said it aloud, these young men from Iowa farms and Brooklyn streets, chuckling over lukewarm coffee as they polished their own behemoths of Detroit steel. The Ha-Go? It was a relic before it even rolled into battle. A punchline in the grand theater of total war. But myths, like shadows in the fog of dawn, often conceal sharper edges. To understand the Ha-Go, to truly feel its place in the symphony of steel and sacrifice, we must journey back, not to the beaches of Saipan or the blood-soaked cane fields of the Pacific, but to the drawing boards of Tokyo, where ambition clashed with the unforgiving arithmetic of empire. It was the early 1930s, and Japan, that island nation forged in the fires of isolation, was awakening to the vastness of its hunger. The Manchurian Incident of 1931 had thrust the Imperial Japanese Army into the sprawling steppes of China, where mud-choked roads and jagged hills mocked the lumbering tanks of Europe. The old Type 89 I-Go, a squat medium born of the Great War's echoes, had proven woefully inadequate. Too slow for the hit-and-run ambushes of guerrilla warfare, too fragile against the biting Soviet T-26s encountered at Khalkhin Gol. Japan needed something fleet, something that danced with the terrain, rather than bulldozed it. Enter Tomio Hara, a man whose name would become synonymous with the quiet genius of mobility. Not a bombastic general or a headline-grabbing admiral, but an engineer, slight of build, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that saw blueprints as living things. Hara, born in 1895 to a family of modest means in rural Japan, had risen through the ranks of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, not on charisma, but on an unyielding faith in the poetry of speed. Armor is a chain, he once confided to a colleague over tea in a dimly lit workshop, his voice steady as the tick of a drafting compass. It binds you to the earth, but speed is the wind that carries the blade. Hara's philosophy was no abstract musing, it was born of Japan's geography and its military soul. An archipelago of mountains and rice paddies, Japan had long prized agility over brute force. The samurai's katana over the knight's broadsword, the fisherman's net over the whaler's harpoon. In tanks, this translated to a doctrine of kosoku undo, rapid maneuver, designed for the fractured battlefields of Asia, where open plains gave way to choking jungles and razor-wire ridges. The Type 95, christened Ha-Go, for its place as the third light tank iteration in the imperial calendar, 2595 by the Japanese reckoning, was Hara's manifesto in riveted steel. Conceived in 1933 and prototyped by 1934, it emerged from Mitsubishi's foundries in Nagoya like a sparrow from the forge, light at just 7.4 tons, nimble on its bell crank suspension that Hara himself had innovated. Picture it, 4 road wheels per side, bellied low to the ground, each bogey arm swinging like a pendulum to devour ruts and roots. No cumbersome Christie system here, borrowed from American excess. Hara's design was indigenous, elegant in its simplicity, allowing the Ha-Go to crest 28 miles per hour on flat ground, faster than many mediums of its day. Its heart was a Mitsubishi Type 95 diesel, a 120 horsepower growl that sipped fuel sparingly, extending range to 150 miles without refueling. Armament, a 37mm Type 98 gun in a 2-man turret, flanked by twin 7.7mm machine guns, one coaxial, the other in the hull for the bowgunner. It wasn't built to duel heavies. It was forged to support infantry, to dart through the flanks like a wolf pack through underbrush, suppressing enemy nests with bursts of fire before vanishing into the haze. Yet for all its grace, the Ha-Go carried the scars of compromise. Armor maxed at 12mm on the turret front, paper-thin against anything larger than a pea shooter. The riveted construction, cheaper and quicker to produce than welded plates, rattled under fire, and the open-top variants left crews exposed to the jungle's wrath. Monsoons that flooded the engine, vines that snared the tracks. Hara knew these frailties intimately. In late-night sketches, illuminated by the flicker of a single bulb, he wrestled with the eternal trade-off. More armor meant more weight meant less speed, and speed, in Hara's vision, was the soul of survival. We fight not as giants but as shadows, he thought, tracing the curve of a hull plate. Let the enemy chase phantoms. By 1936, the first production models rolled out. 1300 would follow over the next 7 years. Mitsubishi's lines humming day and night to arm divisions from Malaya to Burma. The Ha-Go became Japan's workhorse, its most produced armored fighting vehicle, a testament to a philosophy that prized the fox over the bear. But philosophy alone does not steel the human heart. Behind every rivet, every gear meshed in the gloom of a tank park, were the men who would one day command them, young souls bound by Bushido and the inexorable pull of duty. Consider Private First Class Kenji Yamamoto, a rice farmer's son from Kyushu, barely 19 when he first climbed into a Ha-Go's sweltering belly in 1942. The air inside was thick with the tang of oil and unwashed wool, the turret ring creaking like an old man's joints as he swiveled to face his crewmates. The driver, a stoic fisherman named Hiroshi with hands calloused from hauling nets. The loader, a former schoolteacher called Taro, whose glasses fogged in the diesel heat. They were not warriors of myth, these boys. No towering samurai reborn, but ordinary threads in the emperor's tapestry, drilled in the arts of ambush and evasion at the Kwantung Army's garrisons. Their training was relentless. Hours spent weaving through mock villages, engines whining as they flanked enemy positions, gunners snapping off rounds at swaying dummies. Speed is your shield, their instructors barked, voices echoing off concrete barracks. Strike like lightning, gone before the thunder. Yamamoto's hands trembled the first time he fired the 37mm, the recoil a jolt that bruised his shoulder, but in that moment, something ignited. Not glory, not hatred, but a quiet resolve, the kind that blooms in the shadow of inevitability. Japan was at war, her resources stretched thin across a Pacific ablaze, and the Ha-Go was their chariot. Outdated by 1944, yes, outgunned by the Shermans and Matildas rolling off Allied assembly lines, but alive with the spirit of men who believed in the unseen advantage. They polished their tanks at dawn, whispering prayers to Shinto shrines tucked into the engine compartments, and in the evenings they shared tales of earlier battles. Malaya in 41, where Ha-Gos had sliced through British lines like scissors through silk. Singapore, where their speed had sown panic in the colonial ranks. We are not the strongest, Yamamoto would think, staring at the stars from his bunk, but we are the swiftest. And swiftness endures. Across the ocean, as 1944 dawned, the Allies dismissed these whispers. Intelligence reports painted the Ha-Go as a curiosity, a toy tank, unfit for the grinder of modern warfare. In briefing rooms from Pearl Harbor to Washington, colonels pored over grainy photos, chuckling at its diminutive profile. If that's their best, boys, we've got nothing to worry about, a grizzled supply officer quipped during a stateside drill, his audience of fresh-faced recruits erupting in guffaws. The Sherman M4, that 30-ton colossus with its 75mm howitzer and sloped plates, was the undisputed king, reliable, mass-produced, a symbol of American industrial might. Why fear a machine that a bazooka round could crumple like tinfoil? The myth took root. The Ha-Go was fragile, obsolete, a relic of a nation punching above its weight. And so as the invasion fleets gathered for Operation Forager, the hammer blow against the Marianas, the Ha-Go waited in the shadows of Saipan, its crews coiled like springs in hidden revetments. Dust from training runs still clung to their tracks. The scent of cordite from live fire exercises lingered in the air. Colonel Takashi Goto, commander of the 9th Tank Regiment, paced the palm-fringed command post, his face etched with the lines of a man who had seen too many dawns turn to defeat. Goto was no dreamer like Hara. He was steel incarnate, a veteran of Nomonhan, where Soviet shells had taught him the cost of hesitation. "Our tanks are light," he told his officers one humid evening, maps spread under lantern light, "but our will is heavy. When the Americans come, we will show them that speed is the great equalizer." His men nodded, fists clenched, the diesel engines of 44 Ha-Gos idling softly in the distance, a chorus of restrained fury. No one feared them, not yet. The Marines stormed ashore on June 15th, boots sinking into coral sands, their laughter carrying over the surf as the first captured Hagos were dragged from beachside bunkers. "Look at this thing," one leatherneck jeered, kicking a dented fender. "Hell, I could outrun it on foot." The world turned, oblivious to the tremor building beneath the island's volcanic skin. In the pre-dawn hush of the 16th, as mist rolled down from Mount Tupachau like a shroud, the engines would stir. And in that awakening roar, the myth would begin to crack. The invasion of Saipan was meant to be a swift unraveling, a surgical strike in the grand calculus of island hopping, the Marianas Chain, the next domino in America's push toward Tokyo's doorstep. Operation Forager, they called it, a name as clinical as the maps unrolled in admirals' cabins, but to the men of the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, it was simply the next fight. 70,000 strong, they surged ashore under the shadow of the USS Mount McKinley, their Shermans churning the shallows into froth, 30 cals chattering at pillboxes that spat defiance from the dunes. The Japanese garrison, some 30,000 souls under Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, fought with the ferocity of the trapped, but the beachhead held. By dusk of D-Day, the stars and stripes fluttered from makeshift poles amid the wreckage of barbed wire and shattered palms, and the Marines allowed themselves a breath. Not victory, not yet, but a foothold, hard-won and unyielding. In the fading light, as corpsmen bandaged the wounded and engineers bulldozed paths through the underbrush, the first Hagos came into view. Captured intact from coastal revetments, they squatted in the sand like abandoned toys, their riveted hulls dusted with volcanic grit, diesel tanks still warm to the touch. A squad from Company B, 2nd Tank Battalion, gathered around one, their laughter cutting through the evening haze like shrapnel. Private Eddie Callahan, a lanky kid from Chicago with a perpetual squint from welder's flash, rapped his knuckles on the turret, a hollow clang that echoed his disbelief. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he guffawed, wiping sweat from his brow. "This the best they got? Looks like my old man's toolbox on tracks." His buddies joined in, a chorus of rough mirth. The bow gunner poking at the exposed engine vents, the loader hoisting himself onto the fender to peer inside the open hatch, where the scent of stale oil and rice rations hung heavy. "Hell, I could flip this thing with a jeep," another chimed, a burly Georgian named Rawls, his voice booming over the surf. They weren't wrong, not entirely. Intelligence briefings had drilled the Hagos' frailties into them like rote prayers. 12mm armor that a 50 Browning would shred at 500 yards, a 37mm pop gun outranged by their own 75s, tracks narrow enough to bog in Saipan's cane-choked mud. Captain Harlan Hawk Reynolds, commander of a Sherman platoon, leaned against his idling M4, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he surveyed the prize. Hawk was a veteran of Tarawa's meat grinder, his face a map of scars and skepticism, but even he cracked a grin. "Boys, if this is their armor, we might just drive right to Tokyo for cocktails." The laughter swelled, a brief rebellion against the island's humid grip, the ever-present drone of P-38s overhead. They posed for photos, grainy Kodaks that would later yellow in family albums, fists raised triumphantly beside the diminutive tank. Its machine gun barrel pointed skyward like a surrendered white flag. In that moment, the Hago was not a foe, but a footnote. Mocked, diminished, reduced to the punchline of overconfident men who had stared down bigger shadows. But beneath the banter, a quiet unease stirred in some. Sergeant Lee Patterson, Hawk's executive officer, knelt by the Hago's undercarriage, his fingers tracing the bell crank suspension with a mechanic's curiosity. Patterson was no stranger to machines. Back in Detroit, he'd tuned Fords before the draft called, and something about this design nagged at him. The low profile, the compact drivetrain engineered for serpentine paths, not the open European fields. "It's built for this," he thought, glancing at the tangled sugarcane fields stretching inland, their stalks whispering in the breeze like conspirators. "Not for us, for them." He said nothing, though. The mood was too buoyant, the dead too fresh for doubts. Instead, he stood, dusted his hands, and joined the circle, forcing a chuckle as Rawls mimed machine-gunning the tank from inside. "One burst, and it's scrap," Rawls declared, and the group nodded, the myth solidifying like mortar in the cooling sand. As night cloaked Saipan in velvet black, the laughter ebbed into the rhythms of war's interlude. Sentries paced the perimeter, their bayonets glinting under starlight, while cooks dished out sea rations around flickering oil drums, ham and lima beans, the eternal gripe of the Pacific theater. The air grew thick with the chirp of koki frogs and the distant rumble of naval guns shelling Japanese holdouts on Tinian across the channel. In the command tents, colonels pored over airdropped maps, plotting the push inland toward Charan Kanoa and the Orodi Peninsula, where Saito's forces huddled in caves and canebrakes. The Marines' objective was clear: seize the island in a week's time, pave the way for B-29s to pound the Japanese homeland. Overconfidence? Perhaps, but it was earned. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Kwajalein had bloodied them, yet here they stood, the beachhead secure, the enemy reeling. "Tomorrow, we crack 'em wide open," Hawk told his crew over a shared flask of bootleg bourbon, the liquid burning like resolve. His Sherman, Iron Bess, loomed nearby, its 30 tons of bulwark against the dark. Miles inland, in the shadowed folds of Saipan's volcanic heart, the Japanese stirred differently. Colonel Takashi Goto's 9th Tank Regiment lay dispersed in camouflaged lairs, banyan thickets and dry riverbeds where the Hagos blended like ghosts into the foliage. Goto, a wiry figure in faded khaki, his epaulets frayed from Nomenhan's dust, gathered his officers under a canopy of stars obscured by camouflage netting. The air hummed with the low thrum of idling engines, masked by the island's nocturnal chorus. At 44 machines strong, veterans of the Philippines and green replacements alike, they were the spear point of Saito's counterstroke, a desperate bid to hurl the invaders back into the sea. Goto's voice was gravel over silk as he traced the night's plan on a tattered map. Infiltrate the Marine lines under cover of darkness, strike at dawn from the flanks, sow chaos in the cane fields where American heavies would founder. "Our brothers on the beaches have bought us time," he said, his eyes reflecting the glow of a field radio's dial. "Now we repay it with steel and speed." His men, those young sentinels of empire, absorbed the words like parched earth the rain. Private Kenji Yamamoto, sweat beading on his brow in the Hago's confines, gripped the turret traverse handle until his knuckles whitened. The air inside Kaze no Tsume, Claw of the Wind, his crew's quiet moniker for their tank, was stifling, laced with the metallic tang of oiled breech blocks and the faint, herbal whiff of green tea shared earlier. Hiroshi, the driver, murmured a Kujian prayer, his fingers tracing mudras on the gearshift, while Taro the loader polished the 37mm rounds with a rag, each shell a talisman against the inevitable. They were disciplined, these boys, drilled in the imperial way until maneuvers blurred into muscle memory, but beneath the stoicism lay the weight of Banzai, the knowledge that Saipan was no feint, no raid, but a linchpin. Fall here, and the home islands lay bare. "We move as one," Yamamoto thought, visualizing the charge, engines bursting from the mist, tracks chewing earth, guns barking in staccato fury. Fast as hares gone before the hounds bay. Goto paced among the tanks, a lantern swinging in his hand like a will-o'-the-wisp, pausing at each to murmur encouragement. To the commander of the 3rd Company, a scar-faced captain named Ikeda, "Remember Hara's gift. Our speed is their blind spot." Ikeda nodded, his face a mask of Bushido calm, though his hands betrayed him with a faint tremor on his sword hilt. The colonel moved on, the night air alive with the subtle creak of loading racks, the soft clink of ammunition belts fed into Type 97 machine guns. Radios crackled with final coordinates, artillery spotters reporting Marine positions by the glow of their own fires. It was 200 hours when the order whispered through the lines, engines to life, but throttled low, a murmur rather than a roar. The Hagos stirred, diesel hearts coughing to wakefulness, exhaust curling like foxfire into the canopy. Tracks bit into soft loam, the suspension flexing over roots and ruts with a grace born of Hara's foresight. No blare of horns, no clash of bugles, just the inexorable creep forward, 44 shadows weaving through the dark toward the American lines a mile distant. Back on the beachhead, the Marines settled into uneasy repose. Patterson lay on his cot, the canvas creaking under him, his journal open to a blank page illuminated by a shielded flashlight. Day 1, ashore easy. Japs folded quick. Found one of their tanks. Tin Lizzie on steroids. Crew bets on who breaches it first with a Garand. He paused, pen hovering, the island's humidity frizzing the ink. A distant crump of mortar fire punctuated the thought, but it was routine, harassing shots from the hills. Hawk snored nearby, his Sherman crew scattered in foxholes, rifles cradled like lovers. The laughter of evening had faded into yawns and whispers. The captured Hago now a silhouette against the moonlit surf, its hatch propped open like a yawn. Sentries strained their eyes into the gloom, but the cane fields beyond lay still, a black sea unbroken. No warning in the wind, no tremor in the earth, just the deceptive peace of pre-dawn, when the world holds its breath. At 4:30, as the first blush of false dawn tinged the eastern sky, Goto's voice cut the static on the regimental net. Ikari no Kazi, storm wind rises. Engines revved in unison, a building growl that swallowed the frog's chorus. The Hagos surged from their hides, diesel thunder rolling down the slopes like an avalanche in slow motion. Dust clouds bloomed in their wake, faint veils in the mist, as they threaded the flanks, past marine outposts dozing on overconfidence, around artillery parks where 105s slumbered under tarps. Yamamoto's heart hammered in sync with the engine, the world narrowing to the periscope's slit. Blurred foliage whipping past, the loom of sugarcane stalks like spears. Now he breathed, as the lead tanks crested the rise overlooking the American assembly areas. Shells were chambered, machine guns cocked. The mist clung low, a Confederate in their audacity. In the Marine lines, a lone sentry, a kid from Spokane named Riley, froze at his post, cigarette forgotten between fingers. "What the hell?" he muttered, squinting into the gray. A low rumble building like thunder from the wrong quarter. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision, low, darting, impossibly swift. His whistle pierced the hush, a shrill alarm that shattered the night. Radios sparked to life. "Contact. Tanks inbound. Jesus, they're moving." Hawk bolted from his cot, boots tangling in straps, the camp erupting in a frenzy of shouts and stumbling shadows. Patterson grabbed his helmet, journal tumbling forgotten as the first bursts of Japanese machine gun fire stitched the earth. Zip, 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 tracers lancing like fireflies gone mad. Shermans coughed to life, turrets grinding in protest, but the dark was alive now, churning with motion no briefing had prepared them for. They weren't ready for what was coming out of the dark. Dawn on Saipan, June 16, 1944, broke not with the gentle blush of tropical sunrise, but with a rupture, a seam torn in the fabric of certainty. The mist hung low over the cane fields, a ghostly shroud that muffled the marine perimeter like a conspirator's whisper. At 05:15, as the first fingers of light clawed over the horizon, Colonel Takashi Goto's order cascaded through the regimental net. "Hayate, Gale Force, engage." 44 Hagos answered as one, their Mitsubishi diesels surging from idle to full throttle in a heartbeat, the growl building to a banshee howl that reverberated through the volcanic soil. Tracks clattered over roots and craters, the bell crank suspension, Hara's unsung symphony, absorbing the jolts with predatory grace. They weren't charging in rigid echelon, no lumbering blitz of European memory. This was Kosoku Undo incarnate, a fluid swarm darting from cover to cover, flanking wide through the knee-high cane that whipped against hulls like vengeful spirits. From the lead tank, Ikari no Kiba, Fury's Fang, Goto himself commanded the thrust, his gloved hands steady on the traverse wheel, periscope framing the American lines in fractured slivers. Tents sagging under dew, Shermans hulking like slumbering beasts, foxholes stirring with the groggy scramble of men roused from sea ration dreams. "Forward, brothers," he murmured into the intercom, voice a blade tempered in defeat. "Show them the wind's edge." The Hagos accelerated, hitting 25 miles per hour across the flats, faster than a man could sprint, faster than the eye could fix. Dust bloomed in their wake, veils of red earth that choked the air with the scent of disturbed soil and hot metal. Machine guns chattered first, coaxial 7.7 millimeters spitting 450 rounds a minute, tracers arcing like fireflies drunk on rage, raking the marine assembly areas. A machine gun nest splintered under the onslaught, its 30 cal falling silent mid-burst, crewmen tumbling into the mud with cries that dissolved into the din. Private Kenji Yamamoto, in Kaze no Tsume, felt the world compress into the turret's iron womb. The air thrummed with vibration, the diesel's pulse syncing with his own, a frantic tattoo against ribs. Hiroshi floored the throttle, the Hago bucking over a shell crater's lip, sugarcane stalks exploding against the vision slits in green confetti. Targets left. Infantry cluster. Yamamoto barked, his voice cracking on the edge of adrenaline. Taro slammed home a 37mm round, the breech clunking shut like fate's gavel. Yamamoto's thumb depressed the pedal. The gun bucked, a muffled whoomp that hurled high-explosive death at 800 meters per second. The shell struck a fuel dump, igniting a blossom of orange flame that lit the mist in hellish chiaroscuro. We are ghosts, Yamamoto thought, reloading with hands blurred by sweat, but ghosts with teeth. Another burst from the bow gun, Hiroshi's domain, chewed through a sandbag revetment, silencing a radio operator mid-call. The Hago weaved right, evading a wild spray of return fire, its speed a talisman against the gathering storm. In the marine lines, confusion bloomed like ink in water. Sergeant Lee Patterson vaulted from his foxhole, helmet askew, the chill mist slick on his skin as he sprinted for Iron Bess. The Sherman was already stirring, its right radial coughing black smoke, the driver cursing as the beast lurched forward. "Tanks, Japs, tanks coming in hot," a runner yelled, voice raw over the radio net. But the words tangled in the chaos. Hawk Reynolds, bleary-eyed and profane, clambered into his cupola, binoculars slapping against his chest. "What the? They're right on us." The shapes resolved in the lifting fog, not the ponderous chihas of intel nightmares, but these darting imps, low-slung, noisy, impossibly quick. A Hago streaked past at 50 yards, its turret swiveling with a whine, 37mm barking a round that caromed off Iron Bess's glacis in a shower of sparks. The impact jolted Patterson like a gut punch. He grabbed the 50 cal mount, traversing frantically, but the target was gone, swallowed by a fold in the cane, engine snarl fading into echoes. The machine gunners hesitated, and in that fracture, the world tilted. Corporal Manny Ruiz, nested behind his water-cooled Browning on a tripod amid the artillery park, tracked the lead Hago through iron sights, its riveted side glinting like fool's gold in the dawn. "Gotcha, you little bastard," he growled, squeezing the trigger. The 50 roared, a 600-round-per-minute tempest that tore furrows in the earth, but the tank jinked left on Hiroshi's cue, tracks skidding in a pivot tighter than any Sherman could dream. Bullets whined off hull plates, pinging like hail on a tin roof, but the Hago pressed on, closing to 200 yards, its own machine gun stitching Ruiz's position. Sandbags shredded, a loader screamed as rounds found flesh. Ruiz ducked, heart hammering, the gun's barrel smoking as he cranked it right, too late. The Hago blurred past, a diesel gust that left only dust and the acrid tang of cordite. "How the hell do you hit something that don't sit still?" Ruiz thought, wiping blood from a grazing cut, his hands trembling on the spade grip. Around him the line fractured. Gunners firing at phantoms, rounds chewing cane stalks into confetti, the air thick with the ozone snap of near misses. Goto's swarm exploited the vertigo, fanning into platoons that struck like hornets from the flanks. The 1st Company veered south toward the 4th Marines command post, their guns hammering a mortar section into silence, shells bursting in premature fury, shrapnel scything the air. Private Eddie Callahan, the Chicago kid from the Beachhead Jests, froze mid-reload behind a 30 cal, his Garand forgotten as a Hago loomed from the mist at 30 miles per hour. Its bowgun chattered, rounds zipping past his ear like vengeful wasps. He dove into a crater, mud splattering his face, the tank's shadow engulfing him for a heartbeat before it vaulted a rise and vanished. "They're everywhere. Moving like the devil," he radioed, voice pitching high, the laughter of yesterday a ghost in his throat. Shermans groaned into action, their 75mm howitzers traversing with the ponderous grind of waking giants. Too slow, always too slow. One fired, the recoil a seismic thud that flattened nearby cane. The shell arced high, detonating in a geyser of earth 100 yards behind a fleeing Hago. The light tank didn't falter. It accelerated, weaving through the debris like a dancer in a storm. Shock rippled outward, a contagion more potent than any shell. In the 2nd Division's HQ, a colonel barked orders into a field phone, his face ashen under the helmet's brim. "Get those heavies up, flank speed, and for Christ's sake, somebody hit 'em!" But the Hagos were oil on water. Slippery, uncontainable. Yamamoto's tank plunged through a breached wire entanglement, the 37mm finding a fuel bowser that erupted in a whoosh of flame, silhouetting a squad of engineers in their final scramble. Taro whooped, a rare crack in the discipline. "Hit! Press on!" But Yamamoto silenced him with a glance. Joy was fleeting in this gale. Another Hago, commanded by the scar-faced Ikeda, took a grazing 50 round to the track, rubber shredding, bogey arm buckling. But Ikeda gunned it forward, limping into a copse where it pivoted, hull MG raking a Sherman loader exposed on his turret. The American tumbled, a red arc in the light, and Ikeda's crew exhaled in unison. The diesels thrummed their only requiem. Patterson, astride Iron Bess's 50, finally tracked a target. A Hago darting across a firebreak, its rivets winking in the rising sun. He led it by yards, instinct honed in Tarawa sands, and unleashed. The Browning hammered, tracers lacing the air like a comet's tail. Rounds punched through the thin rear armor, 12mm yielding like wet cardboard, igniting the fuel lines in a belch of black smoke. The Hago slewed, flames licking its engine deck, but it fired once more, a defiant 37mm that ricocheted off the Sherman's turret ring with a screech like nails on slate. The crew bailed, 3 shadows tumbling into the cane, swallowed by the fray, leaving their iron steed to gutter out in a pyre of twisted steel. Patterson lowered the smoking barrel, breath ragged, staring at the wreck. Fast as hell and gone just as quick. Hawk's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good shot, Lee, but there's more. Keep 'em comin'." The Sherman lurched forward, treads pulverizing cane into pulp, joining the counter-thrust as naval guns offshore began to thunder, their 16-inch shells walking the ridges in cataclysmic rhythm. The charge peaked then fractured, the Hagos' velocity sowing seeds of doubt even as it reaped their toll. 5 machines burned in the fields, oily pyres marking hasty graves, another bogged in an irrigation ditch, its crew fighting hand-to-hand with a Marine squad amid the muck. Goto's voice urged them on, "Hold the line of wind!" For the Emperor. But the mist burned away, exposing them to the Sherman's wrath. Bazookas twanged from concealed pits, rockets slamming home with hollow thunks that breached hulls and brewed up ammunition. Machine gunners found their rhythm, 50 cals converging in interlocking fire that turned darting shadows into sieves. Yet for those first fevered minutes, as the sun crested Mount Tapachau and bathed the carnage in gold, the Marines faltered. Not from wounds, but from the unfamiliar terror of pursuit upended. The Hagos weren't juggernauts, they were specters, their speed a scalpel in the blunt fist of war. They weren't strong, they were fast, and that was worse. By 600, the Dawn charge had devolved into a maelstrom, the Hagos' initial velocity fracturing against the anvil of American response. The cane fields, once a whispering green labyrinth, now burned in patches, stalks ignited by errant rounds, flames crackling upward in hungry fingers that clawed at the humid sky. Dust clouds, red and choking, billowed from the tank's passage, veiling the battlefield in a sepia fog that turned friend to phantom and foe to guesswork. The air reeked of it all. Scorched vegetation sharp as betrayal, the oily belch of diesel under strain, the copper tang of blood mingling with the wet earth scent of ruptured fuel lines. Shells from offshore battleships walked the ridges in thunderous cadence, their 14-inch salvos quaking the ground like the footfalls of indifferent gods. While closer in, the pop-pop of Garans and the whip-crack of Nambus wove a deadly counterpoint. Colonel Takashi Goto, astride Ikari no Kiba, felt the shift like a blade's twist in his gut. The periscope's slit framed a world gone mad, a Sherman looming through the haze, its 75mm belching flame, a knot of Marines scattering like roaches before a boot. "Regroup on the rise, flank left," he commanded, his voice a whip-crack over the intercom static, but the net crackled with fragments. Engine hit, bailing, from the 2nd platoon. Infantry closing. Need support, from Ikeda's beleaguered machine. Goto traversed the turret manually now, the electric drive felled by a near miss, his shoulder aching from the crank's resistance. The 37mm found its mark, a 30-cal nest that shredded under high explosive fury, the gun's recoil a familiar jolt that grounded him amid the swirl. We were the storm, he thought, wiping rivulets of sweat that blurred his vision, but storms break on stone. His Hago lurched forward, tracks slithering through a morass of mud and cane pulp, the suspension groaning as it crested a lip scarred by artillery. Below, in a shallow draw, a pair of Shermans pivoted ponderously, their commanders exposed in cupolas, scanning the dust for targets that refused to hold still. Across the field, Sergeant Lee Patterson clung to Iron Bess's 50 cal like a man to a crucifix, the gun's barrel a glowing rod from sustained fire. His world had narrowed to bursts and breaths, traverse, lead, squeeze, repeat until the recoil numbed his arms. The Hagos were devils in the dust, streaking low and erratic, their diesel roars dopplering past like mocking laughter. One vaulted a crater not 40 yards off, its bowgun chattering a stream that stitched sparks across the Sherman's flank. Patterson tracked it instinctively, the Browning's hammerfall chewing through its rear deck in a storm of lead. Armor buckled, rivets popping like champagne corks, fuel igniting in a whoosh that hurled the turret hatch skyward, a brief corona of flame before the wreck slewed into a burning skid. "Got one," Patterson yelled, voice hoarse over the din, but triumph soured quick. Another shape flickered left, gone before he could swing. "They're like hornets. Sting and scatter." Hawk's bellow cut through. Lee, eyes sharp, more coming from the tree line. The Sherman rocked as its main gun fired hat, the 75mm shell detonating amid a copse where two Hagos had sought cover, bark and steel erupting in a lethal confetti that felled one outright. In the heart of the chaos, individual threads of valor wove through the tapestry of terror. Acts born not of grand strategy, but of the raw imperative to endure. Private Kenji Yamamoto's Kaze no Tsume had become a lone wolf, separated from Goto's main body by a ravine choked with debris. The engine whined in protest, overheating from a grazed coolant line, steam hissing from vents like the breath of a wounded beast. Hiroshi nursed the throttle, weaving through shell craters that pocked the earth like divine pox, while Taro loaded with mechanical frenzy, his glasses askew, sweat carving tracks through the grime on his face. "Sherman dead ahead 400 meters," Yamamoto called, spotting the hulking M4 broadside in a momentary lull. Its crew dismounted and prying at a bogged track. The Hago surged, closing the gap in a blur, tracks flinging clods, the diesel peaking at its 28 miles per hour zenith. Yamamoto's thumb hovered on the fire pedal, heard a war drum. One shot, then away. The 37mm spoke, armor-piercing round slamming home below the turret ring. The Sherman shuddered, smoke belching from the sponson as its fuel caught. Cheers erupted from the Japanese crew. "Yamato Damashi!" Taro gasped, invoking the soul of unbroken Japan, but Yamamoto cut them short. "Not yet." Infantry. A Marine squad, emboldened by the wreck, rose from concealed pits, bazookas shouldered like Avengers' bows. The first rocket streaked, a hollow thwang, slamming the earth short, shrapnel pinging off the Hago's glacis like vengeful rain. Hiroshi jinked right, the tank fishtailing through cane that lashed the vision ports, but the second found its mark. A glancing blow to the right track that sheared bogey arms in a screech of tortured metal. Kaze no Tsume ground to a halt, slewed sideways, engine racing futilely against the bind. Yamamoto kicked open the turret hatch, the sudden influx of acrid air a slap, dust and fire and the metallic reek of fear. "Outflank them," he ordered, Type 100 submachine gun in hand, leaping into the furrow with Taro at his heels. Hiroshi covered from the bow's slit, his 7.7mm barking defiance as the Marines closed, Garan's cracking in disciplined rhythm. Yamamoto rolled behind a toppled palm, the subgun stock slick against his cheek, and squeezed, a burst that felled the lead bazooka man in a crumple of khaki and cries. Taro, less seasoned, fired wild, his rounds chewing bark until a ricochet grazed his arm, blooming red. "Keep low," Yamamoto hissed, dragging him down as bullets whined overhead, plowing furrows in the soft earth. The Japanese pair held for an eternity compressed to seconds, Yamamoto's fire suppressing the flanks, Taro lobbing a grenade that burst amid the squad in a flash of shrapnel and screams. 2 Marines fell, their advance shattering like glass, the rest peeled back, dragging wounded, the air thick with their profanity. "Goddamn fanatics. Fall back." Yamamoto rose, chest heaving, the subgun smoking in his grip. "We live," he thought, binding Taro's wound with a strip torn from his own sleeve, but for how long? Hiroshi's voice crackled from the tank. "More coming." Sherman's. The respite ended. Kaze no Tsume was a sitting target now, its heroism reduced to a pyre waiting to ignite. Shock mirrored on the American side where overconfidence curdled into a visceral reckoning. Corporal Manny Ruiz, his 50 nest now a splintered ruin, crawled on elbows through the cane, shoulder throbbing from shrapnel that had kissed bone. He'd seen the Hago up close, too close, its diesel snarl fading as it claimed his loader, the kid from Philly, crumpling without a sound. "Bastards move like snakes," Ruiz muttered to Private Eddie Callahan, who hunkered beside him. Garand clutched white-knuckled. Callahan's face was a mask of soot and disbelief, the beachhead's jests ashes in his mouth. Earlier, he'd emptied a clip into a streaking shadow. Bullets sparking harmlessly off fleeing tracks, the impotence burning hotter than any wound. Now, as a fresh Hago platoon crested the rise, 3 machines in loose diamond guns questing, they froze, the field's geometry turning predator to prey. Captain Hawk Reynolds, directing from Iron Bess's cupola, felt the irony like salt in a cut. His Sherman had claimed 2 Hagos already, one with a point-blank canister shot that turned its crew to mist, the other gutted by Coke's fire. But each kill came at a cost. Loaders exposed, drivers cursing as the beast wallowed in the churned mud. "Patterson, take the leader." "Full broadside," Hawk roared, but as the Hago darted its 37mm probing, a round struck the track guard, jamming the final drive in a grind of gears. The Sherman slewed, exposing its flank. Ruiz and Callahan, from their foxhole, poured fire. 50 tracers converging with Garand lead, punching through the thin side plates in a lethal hail. The Hago erupted, flames jetting from hatches as the crew bailed, silhouettes wreathed in fire, rolling in the dirt before machine guns silenced them. Hawk exhaled, the acrid bite of cordite on his tongue, and keyed the radio. "That's 3 down, but Christ, they're buying time with blood." Goto witnessed the attrition from his vantage, his regiment whittled to 28 runners, the rest smoldering hulks that dotted the fields like fallen stars. Ikeda's tank, scarred and limping, covered a bailout, its MG sweeping a Marine advance that threatened to envelop a stranded pair. "For the homeland," Ikeda bellowed, the words a talisman as his gunner fell to a sniper's round, slumping over the breach. Undeterred, Ikeda took the traverse himself, firing blind into the dust until a bazooka ended it. A rocket that breached the turret, the blast hurling him clear in a corona of agony. He crawled, uniform aflame, to a shallow ditch, where he drew his Nambu pistol and held the line alone, shots cracking deliberate, buying seconds for his brothers to regroup. Marines veered wide, respect flickering in their eyes. One, a corpsman tending a wounded man, paused to lob grenades that forced Ikeda's final stand. "You fight good, Jap," the corpsman muttered later, bandaging a prisoner. But Ikeda heard only the Emperor's echo in his fading pulse. Patterson, traversing Iron Bess's 50 anew, nailed another Hago mid-weave, rounds coring the engine, the wreck careening into a burning stall. But as it died, its parting shot glanced the Sherman's optics, shattering glass and drawing blood from Hawk's brow. "I'm hit. Keep firing," Hawk growled, staunching the flow with a rag, his voice steady but laced with the shock of vulnerability. The fields were a charnel now, Hagaz reduced to 8, their speed a fading mirage against the Sherman's inexorable grind. Naval fire intensified, shells marching inland in cataclysm, obliterating a concealed revetment where Goto had hoped to rally. The colonel gunned his tank toward it anyway, a final defiant arc, his 37mm claiming a half-track before a 105mm round from a Marine battery found Ikari no Kiba. The world inverted in white-hot fury, steel peeling like banana skin. Goto hurled into the cane, ribs cracked, vision tunneling. The chaos peaked in a symphony of finality, dust settling on craters rimmed with bodies, fire licking the husks of machines that had danced so briefly. Heroism lingered in the smoke, Yamamoto hauling Taro to safety, only to face a Sherman's cloaks, Ruiz and Callahan trading fire with a die-hard crew until exhaustion claimed them. Goto, dragging himself upright, pistol in hand, locked eyes with a Marine across the killing ground. Patterson, 50 spent, bayonet fixed. No words, just the shared silence of warriors who had glimpsed the other's soul. Then the line surged, and the moment shattered. Speed turned courage into spectacle, and spectacle into death. By 0800, the gale had broken. Goto's 9th Tank Regiment reduced to a scatter of pyres and riddled husks, 36 Hagos claimed by the morning's ledger, their iron bones picked clean by the Sherman's wrath and the unerring bite of 50 caliber fury. The cane fields, once a verdant ambush, lay as a blackened quilt, craters lipped with upflung soil, tracks etched like dying serpents through the loam, spent casings glinting like forsaken coins under the climbing sun. Naval guns had fallen silent offshore, their thunder banked for the next act, leaving only the island's own chorus. The insistent buzz of flies drawn to the feast, the faint rustle of wind through surviving stalks, the labored breaths of survivors piecing together the dawn's delirium. The air shimmered with heat haze, distorting the horizon where Mount Tapachau loomed indifferent, its slopes hiding Saito's retreating remnants in caves of volcanic glass. Sergeant Lee Patterson dismounted Iron Bess with a groan, his boots sinking into the soft blood-soaked earth as the Sherman idled behind him, engine ticking like a cooling forge. His hands, raw from the 50s recoil, trembled faintly as he lit a lucky strike, the match's flare briefly illuminating the stubble on his jaw, shadowed by fatigue. Hawk Reynolds slumped against the turret, a field dressing staunching the gash above his eye, his usual bark muted to a gravelly mutter. "Hell of a wake-up, Lee. Thought we'd have him for breakfast." Patterson exhaled smoke, the burn in his lungs a welcome anchor, and scanned the field. Bodies lay in attitudes of abrupt finality. Japanese crewmen twisted amid the wreckage, uniforms charred and mud-caked, their faces turned skyward as if seeking absolution in the unclouded blue. A few stirred, hands raised in ragged surrender. Corpsmen moved among them with the practiced detachment of their trade, morphine cigarettes glinting like silver promises. But it was the tanks that held Patterson, drawing him forward through the detritus like a pilgrim to a shrine. The nearest Hago squatted bow-deep in a crater, its turret canted at a drunken angle. Rivets splayed outward from a bazooka kiss that had peeled the hull like an orange rind. Smoke curled from the engine bay, lazy spirals carrying the oily reek of consumed diesel, and Patterson knelt, peering into the gloom of the open hatch. The interior was a charnel vignette, loader's seats smeared with gore, a shattered periscope dangling like a broken limb, spent 37mm casings scattered like dice from a gambler's fist. They fought in this, he thought, fingers tracing a bullet-pocked vision slit, the metal still warm, vibrating faintly with residual heat. No room for giants here, no space for the sprawl of a Sherman crew, but a coffin for four, engineered for shadows, not the broad day. He rose, moving on, the cigarette forgotten between his lips, its ember tracing his path like a will-o'-the-wisp. Private Eddie Callahan trailed him, Garand slung loose over one shoulder, his Chicago swagger leached away by the morning's blur. The kid who'd kicked the captured Hago on the beach now walked with eyes downcast, stepping wide around a severed track link coiled like a question mark in the mud. "Sarge, you see how they come at us? I don't know, like they was racing the devil himself." His voice was small, stripped of the barracks bluster, and Patterson nodded, clapping a hand to the boy's shoulder, a gesture more for his own steadiness than comfort. They reached a cluster of wrecks, 3 Hagos in a ragged line, one gutted by canister shot, its guts of wiring and hydraulic lines spilled across the earth like entrails. Another holed through the glacis, the entry wound a ragged mouth frozen in a scream. Marines gathered there already, a loose cordon of leathernecks from Company B, their faces a mosaic of grime and dawning reverence. Corporal Manny Ruiz, arm in a sling improvised from a web belt, prodded the lead tank's suspension with his boot, the bell cranks flexing slightly under the nudge. Unbowed even in death. "Look at this setup," Ruiz said, voice pitched low as if in a cathedral, kneeling to inspect the bogey arms. "Ain't brute force, it's clever, like it was made to dance through this shit, not plow it." The group murmured assent, a circle of quiet scrutiny amid the island's hush. One man, a wiry radio man named Kowalski, hoisted himself onto a fender, peering into the turret where the 37mm gun sagged against its stops, barrels scarred by counterfire. "Heard one of the prisoners talk? Said their boss, some colonel, called it the wind's blade. Fits, don't it? Came out of nowhere, gone before you blinked." Laughter tried to bubble up, nervous, reflexive, but died unspoken, choked by the weight of the scene. These weren't the ponderous Chinas of Tarawa, nor the suicidal hulks of Paliliu. These were specters, fragile as rice paper yet swift as shame, their speed a mirror to the Marine's own complacency. Patterson wandered deeper, drawn to a lone Hago at the field's edge, half swallowed by a bomb crater, its tracks sheared clean by a 105mm round. Smoke wisped from the hatches, thinner now, the fire gutted to embers that glowed like foxfire in the gloom. He circled it slow, the sun baking his back through sweat-soaked OD shirt, and paused at the bow where a nameplate, faded kanji etched in brass, caught the light. Kaze no Tsume. Claw of the wind. Inside, through the driver's slit, he glimpsed movement, A figure slumped but breathing, chest rising in shallow hitches. "Hey, got a live one," Patterson called, voice cracking the silence, and the circle tightened, rifles lowered but wary. Corpsmen pushed through, a lanky ensign named Hargrove leading with his kit, morphine and sulfa at the ready. They pried the hatch with rifle butts and entrenching tools, the metal groaning in protest like a dying breath. Private Kenji Yamamoto emerged first, hauled out by calloused hands that gripped him none too gently, his uniform shredded at the shoulder where Taro's blood had soaked through. He was slight, this farmer's son, face pale beneath the grime, eyes dark pools of exhaustion and defiance. Hiroshi followed, limping on a twisted ankle, his fisherman's hands clenched as if still on the wheel. Taro last, cradled unconscious, his glasses cracked but spared the flames. The Marines ringed them, a khaki wall pierced by the glint of bayonets, but the air held no venom, only the tentative bridge of shared survival. "You boys put up a scrap," Hawk Reynolds said, stepping forward, his bandage a stark white flag against the carnage. He offered a canteen, water sloshing invitingly, and Yamamoto took it after a beat, sipping slow, the liquid tracing clean paths through the dust on his chin. Yamamoto's English was halting, pieced from schoolroom fragments and prison camp rumor, but his gaze met Patterson's steady. "We fast, for Emperor." The words hung, simple as haiku, and Patterson nodded, crouching to eye level, the sun casting their shadows long and intertwined. "For Emperor, for home, for the same damn ghosts we all chase." He thought of his own journal, tucked in Iron Bess's sponson, its pages filling with the unvarnished. They were faster than we thought, faster than fear. No mockery now. The beachhead's jests had burned away with the diesel, leaving respect in the ash, a hard-won currency, minted in the blur of motion and the sting of near misses. Ruiz, ever the tinkerer, knelt by the wounded tank, sketching the suspension on a scrap of map with a stub pencil. Hara, they called the designer, built for this jungle. Not our roads. We could learn something. Murmurs rippled. Practical men seeing genius in the grave, the bell cranks a lesson in agility over armor, the diesel's thrift a rebuke to American excess. Goto's fate sealed the hush. Found by a patrol near the tree line, the colonel lay against a splintered palm, his khaki tunic rent by shrapnel, pistol still clutched in a slack hand. A field notebook lay beside him, pages fluttered by the breeze, inked with meticulous script, coordinates, ammunition tallies, and at the end, in bold strokes, "Speed was all we had, and for a moment, it was enough." The translator, a Nisei from the 4th Division, read it aloud in the gathering circle, his voice steady but laced with the weight of kin. Marines stood bareheaded, helmets under arms, the sun beating down as a makeshift honor rendered. Rifles presented, a moment's silence broken only by the wind's sigh through the cane. "Tough son of a bitch," Callahan whispered, and no one disagreed. Goto's men, the survivors, were herded to the rear under guard, but not before Yamamoto paused, glancing back at Kaze no Tsume's ruin. "We flew," he thought, the memory of 28 miles per hour, a fleeting warmth against the chains, and in flying, we bit. As the morning wore toward noon, the field became a museum of reckoning. Engineers swarmed the wrecks, measuring, photographing, salvaging what gears and guns survived the pyres. One Sherman crewman, a gearhead from Flint named O'Malley, pried open a Hago's transmission, whistling low at the Mitsubishi's compact heart. "Sips like a lady, punches like a mule." If we'd faced these on open ground, he trailed off, the implication a shadow. Speed as the great leveler, fragility be damned. Patterson watched from afar, journal retrieved and open now, pen scratching truths unbidden. Mocked him yesterday. Today, they're in my dreams, streaking past like judgment. The overconfidence of the beachhead had cracked, not shattered. Saipan still theirs, the push inland resuming by 1,000, but forever veined with caution. Sentries doubled on the flanks, machine gun nests resighted for the dart and weave. Briefings would echo with Hara's ghost, the tin can's lesson etched in after-action reports bound for Quantico. The sun climbed higher, baking the dead and the living alike, but in the wreck's cooling shadows a quiet alchemy stirred. Marines walked among them, no longer laughing, but listening, to the settling creak of steel, the whisper of wind through bullet holes, the faint echo of engines that had outrun fear itself. Yamamoto, bandaged and bound for the stockade, caught Patterson's eye one last time across the divide. No words, just a nod, faint as dawn mist. acknowledgement of the thin line between hunter and hunted. The sergeant returned it, pocketing his journal, and turned to the horizon where the war marched on. Sherman's grinding forward, cane parting like a bow wave. Even a doomed tank can leave fear behind. In the wake of Saipan's fury, as the island bent to American will, airfields carved from cane, B-29s thundering skyward toward Tokyo's fragile heart, the Hago's charge lingered not as a tactical footnote, but as a psychological fissure, a crack in the edifice of certainty that war's victors build from the bones of the fallen. By July 1944, with the mopping up complete and the dead tallied at 3,000 Marines and 22,000 Japanese, the after-action reports filtered back to division HQs, their pages stained with the same mud that had choked the tank's treads. Sergeant Lee Patterson's journal, bound in weathered leather and submitted to the 2nd Tank Battalion's archives, became an unlikely testament, not to glory, but to the humility exacted by speed's illusion. June 16th, thought we'd laugh 'em off the beach. Those little bastards came at us like lightning in a bottle. Faster than our Shermans could turn, faster than doubt could settle. Lost 3 good men before breakfast, not to armor, but to the idea of 'em. We won the field, but they stole the morning. Patterson's words, scrawled in the humid scrawl of a man who had stared down the blur, echoed through debriefings and canvas tents, where colonels nodded gravely over lukewarm coffee, the air thick with the ghosts of cordite and cane smoke. Captain Harlan Hawk Reynolds, his brow scar a permanent crescent moon, elaborated in formal dispatches to the Marine Corps Gazette, his prose stripped to the bone. Enemy light tanks, Type 95 designation, employed in a maneuver-centric assault unprecedented in Pacific theater engagements. Velocity approximated 25 to 28 miles per hour in undulating terrain, rendering standard tracking doctrines obsolete. Recommendation: augment flank security with mobile infantry screens, reassess light armor threats in restricted mobility zones. No bombast, no tales of daring do, just the cold arithmetic of adaptation, leavened with an undercurrent of respect. Hawk's report circulated through the ranks like contraband wisdom, read aloud in foxholes on Guam and Peleliu, where leathernecks traded lucky strikes and murmured, "Hawk says they danced rings round Bess. Ain't laughin' no more." The psychology was subtle, insidious. Overconfidence, that velvet glove over war's iron fist, had been slapped away not by superior steel, but by the audacity of the frail. Marines, those sons of industry and assembly lines, learned anew the ancient truth, that the human will, channeled through even a tin whisper of a machine, could make giants blink. Across the Pacific, in the repatriation camps of 1945, Private Kenji Yamamoto carried his own ledger of legacy, etched not in ink, but in the calluses of survival. Saipan had claimed Taro in the stockade's fever ward, the loader's wounds festering under makeshift care, his final breath a murmur of home patties and cherry blossoms. Hiroshi, the driver, vanished into the archipelago's labor details, his fisherman's hands turned to shovels until the war's end. Yamamoto alone returned to Kyushu in 46, a shadow of the boy who had oiled Kaze no Tsume's gears, his uniform traded for a farmer's yukata, the diesel's thrum replaced by the creak of ox carts. Yet in the quiet evenings, as rice shoots whispered in the breeze, he spoke of the charge to wide-eyed nephews clustered around the Aurori hearth. "We were not strong like their great ships," he'd say, voice soft as falling leaves, tracing invisible tracks on the tatami with a gnarled finger. "But we were swift, like the wind over the waves. For those moments, we made them see us, not as ghosts, but as brothers in the storm." His stories, passed like heirlooms, wove the Hago into family lore, a paradox of frailty and fire, its rivets symbols of resolve unbroken. The engineer's regret came later, a quieter requiem amid the rubble of surrender. Tomio Hara, spared the sword by his civilian cloth, retreated to a modest workshop in post-war Yokohama, where the clang of rebuilding drowned the sirens of defeat. By 1947, with MacArthur's occupation loosening its grip, Hara pored over salvaged blueprints, Hago schematics smuggled from Manila wrecks, annotated with Allied assessments that praised the bell crank's elegance even as they damned the armor's scant. Seated under a bare bulb, his ink-stained hands trembling from rationed rice and age, he traced the curves he had drawn in 1933, the lines of a dream born in Manchuria's mud. Speed was my gift, he thought, the memory of diesel trials flooding back, the prototype cresting ruts at 30 km/h, crew cheering like boys at a festival. But gifts, untempered, become chains. In letters to former colleagues, now scattered engineers in Toyota's nascent halls, Hara confessed the calculus of compromise. We chased the fox's grace over the bear's bulk, believing maneuver would suffice where steel could not. Saipan proved the lie, not in our fall, but in the enemy's pause. They respected what we built, even as it burned. Would that respect had come sooner in thicker plates or wiser wars? Hara's lament echoed in the Imperial archives, dusted off in the 1950s as Japan rebuilt not with tanks but with transistors and Toyotas, the Hago's diesel heart reborn in civilian engines that purred through Tokyo's neon veins. Yet the lessons of that dawn charge, so vividly etched in Marine psyches, eluded the high command that had birthed them. In the smoke-filled war rooms of Rabaul and Truk, admirals and generals clung to the Banzai ethos, the faith in spirit's supremacy over steel's shortfall. The Hago's ferocity on Saipan, a fleeting triumph of speed that bought hours, not days, might have whispered of adaptation, hybrid doctrines blending agility with armor, reconnaissance fleets to probe American flanks. Instead, it faded into hagiography, a tale for morale films where light tanks darted eternally victorious, their frailties airbrushed like flaws in a ukiyo-e print. Post-war analyses, penned by staff officers in quiet exile, noted the irony. The Type 95's velocity exposed doctrinal rigidity, yet rigidity prevailed, dooming successors like the Chai-Ha to similar graves. Japan, that nation of swift rivers and seismic earth, learned the poetry of motion too late, her empire crumbling not from slow defeat, but from the failure to let speed evolve into strategy. The true legacy, then, lay in the bridge forged across the divide, a respect born of defeat's stark mirror, where mockery yielded to the solemn nod of equals. In American after-actions, the Hago ascended from punchline to parable. Training manuals at Fort Knox cited Saipan as case study, light armor evasion, diagrams illustrating the dart and weave that had bedeviled Hawk's Shermans. Veterans reunions from VFW halls in Des Moines to dew-kissed cemeteries on Saipan itself retold the tale with a mix of chagrin and admiration. Patterson, graying at the edges by the 1960s, would lean back in his rocker, pipe smoke curling like battlefield haze, and recount to wide-eyed grandsons. They came out of the mist, boys, little boxes on tracks, but they moved like they owned the wind. Made us better, in the end. War's funny that way. Teaches you to fear not the big guns, but the ones that slip the noose. His journal, donated to the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, rests now under glass. Its pages a testament to the psychology of the pivot, how a single morning's shock could temper arrogance into vigilance, turning overconfident legions into sages of the flank. On the Japanese side, the echo was softer, woven into the fabric of remembrance. Yamamoto's farm, passed to his sons, borders a Shinto shrine where a modest plaque, erected in the 1970s by surviving crewmen, commemorates the 9th Regiment, to the wind's children, swift in shadow, eternal in spirit. No glorification of conquest, but a quiet honoring of the trapped valor that had made even doomsayers hesitate. Hara, passing in 1959, left behind a final sketch. A Hago stylized as a crane in flight, wings of riveted steel arcing toward an unseen dawn. Mobility's promise, he inscribed beneath, unfulfilled but unforgotten. In the global ledger of war machines, the Type 95 endures as that rare paradox, a weak tank that fought like it wasn't, its legacy not in victories tallied, but in the pause it imposed on the unstoppable. Engineers in Detroit and Detroit's heirs in Silicon Valley would study its lines, gleaning the genius of lightness. Tacticians from West Point to Sandhurst would nod to its lesson. Underestimation. The silent saboteur claims more thrones than any shell. Decades on, as the Pacific's waves lap eternally at Saipan's shores, the Hago's story whispers through the cane. A reminder that respect is war's most reluctant tribute, earned in the blur between laughter and fear. Mockery ends where courage begins. Even a dying machine can make history flinch. The armor was thin, but the will was faster. And in the end, one honors the enemy not for what they built, but for what they dared in its shadow. They mocked the Hago. But in its final charge, it made the world remember speed.